stay. Sorry, I almost went back out. Almost went away again. I want to say first, because I'll forget to say it if I don't say it first, is that I was thinking the other day, there were two things I would be remiss if I didn't mention. One of them is gone, so I'm going to be remiss in not mentioning whatever that was. But the other thing is that today is Pearl Harbor Day. It's December 7th, the 72nd, right? Anniversary of Pearl Harbor. My math isn't so good. I was trying to check my math as I was supposed to be meditating there. 42, right? And Pearl Harbor, in some ways, was about hope, which is the theme for today. And I was reminded last night, as I did a memorial service, how much I despise themes. And I always wondered why I despise themes. And I served a church for 9 years that loved themes. And I always thought that was my penance for something. But it was such severe penance. Clearly I haven't done whatever it is I was doing penance for, so I must have a freebie coming up down the road. Because it seems to me, if you say, Sunday we're going to talk about, pick anything, hope. You shut the door on whatever you might hear during the week sometimes, and whatever might come out of what happens here as we listen to lessons being read and have some time to reflect silently, and yet somehow, I suppose it always works out. Now, of course, hope, there's hope that says, I hope I get a new puppy for Christmas. I do not, by the way, hope I get a new puppy for Christmas. That's just an example, so don't get any ideas. Yes. But that's not the kind of hope we're talking about. The kind of hope we're talking about is what I like to think of as that thing that allows us to go on. That kind of hope that says somehow it's going to be all right. And of course, the first thing, I put this here for a reason, it's not the kind of hope that says, every week I look at this thing, because there's a flap on it that needs to be glued down. And I end up looking at it as I'm waiting to ring the bell, wondering if somehow magically the flap has been, reattached. That's not the kind of hope we're talking about either. But it seems to me that hope is the thing that if I can take it away from you, I can control you. It was the essence of Pearl Harbor. If that one blow could have been struck, hope would have been lost. And yet, quite often, attempts to do that backfire. You could say that in at least a corner or two of religion, the goal is to take hope away, at least historically, and make people dependent. And I'll get into that a little bit in a minute, but as I was reflecting on this whole hope thing, and I was looking for a Buddhist reading or a Hindu reading maybe that would have something to do with hope. And then, for a lot of reasons, I couldn't find one. But I stumbled across this discussion about the idea of hope from an Eastern spiritual perspective. And one of the things you hear drummed, the drum that's beat on a lot in Eastern circles, is that hope in Eastern spirituality resides in the individual. And that there's a certain amount of pride, although they certainly don't call it that, in this idea that somehow in Eastern spirituality, there's not a dependence on an outside source to rescue us. And that's their understanding of the Christian message, is that somehow we're all sitting here waiting for Jesus to swoop down and somehow rescue us. And to be sure, there have been a lot of people that have made a lot of money, convincing you that if you send them a lot of money, then Jesus will in fact rescue you. But a more open, it seems to me, and honest look at the Christian story says that if there's rescuing to be done, and we can debate that, it's already happened. except in certain corners of the church where you haven't yet quite said the sinner's prayer exactly correct. Done the things you need to do, jump through the hoop, send me $1,000, I'll sweat on a prayer cloth for you and send it back, and that sort of thing. Except in those corners, people really, I think properly understood, aren't waiting for anything to happen. Rather, if you really understand Christian spirituality at its depths, what you're trying to enter into is a deeper place, a deeper relationship. It's not that you're waiting to be rescued. It's not that we're waiting to be thrown a life preserver. We haven't been tossed overboard on the Titanic and we're hoping somebody's going to come along and grab us. So, if that's not what it is, then what is it? I saw somebody else writing about Buddhism who said, well, if you're really equanimous, one of the things in our closing prayer is, may all beings have equanimity. If you've really reached that state where you're okay with everything that whatever might happen, then you don't need hope because you're okay with whatever happens. And I think that's a misperception too. I don't think you can get to where you're okay with whatever happens unless you have hope. Otherwise, and one of the criticisms actually of Western Buddhists is that they're far too easy to jump to this place where they think they're equanimous. So that choiceless awareness, when where they really go to is what I like to call informal religious language, I don't give a shit. So they get to, I don't give a shit, and think they're in choiceless awareness. But have you ever heard somebody say, I don't give a shit without an angry edge? I don't think you can get there and really have choiceless awareness. Really say whatever happens, it's okay. We like to play at it. I'm reminded always of my mother carrying on. I think I was 18 or 19 years old and I had the audacity to bring a girlfriend home. What was I thinking? It was a bad idea. And she's slamming the kitchen cupboards. Boom, boom, boom. I said, something wrong. You seem a little angry. And I was observant even at that age, and she said, I'm not angry. I'm just alone with my private thoughts. Okay, that's not equanimous. That's, I don't give a shit, right? that's yelling at the top of your lungs, I'm not angry, which always betrays something going on underneath. So how do we get to that place where we have so much hope that we can handle whatever comes up? I don't know, because I'm not there yet. But I would suggest that at least part of it is that we recognize that our need to control is based in fear. Strangely enough, or maybe not, anger is based in fear. In fact, you could say that just about every, and I'm kind of ambivalent about calling any emotion negative, but anything we normally call a negative emotion is based in fear. Jealousy is based in fear. Somebody's going to take what I have. So now I'm jealous. Fear says that I am in danger. And that very instinctive part of being a human being says, I need to do something to resolve that. I can't get to a place where I'm okay with what happens unless I've come to realize that there's nothing that can happen that will change the essence of who I am. And I believe really the only way you can get there, at least in my experience, is to understand that the essence of who you are is connected to perfection, or connected to the divine, or connected to something that isn't stuck in this little segment of your life and what you're going through. As I mentioned, I did a memorial service last night. It was for a woman whose family were a part of the first church that I was called to serve. And another one I started along the way, which led to some animosity in the first one. But that's it. That's a story for a different day. 4 adult sisters who had 2 brothers who I never knew. They died before I knew them. The mother and stepfather of the sisters were part of the church. Their father had died at an early age. And now this was the second daughter that died since I've known them, whose memorial service I did last night at 44, after being in a nursing home for 8 years. And was vocal but not verbal since she went into the nursing home. And yet, she was, as near as you could tell from somebody who can't really tell you verbally, happy. She certainly impacted a lot of people in the nursing home. We had a memorial service in the, I don't know what room that is, in the community activity room, which is a pretty good sized room in this particular place, and there must have been 125 people there, which is pretty amazing for somebody who's been in a nursing home for 8 years. And you might say that despite her change in circumstance, she never lost hope. I don't know how that happens. I watched her three children struggle with the onset of their mother's illness. What does it mean now that my mother has this illness? Move from some glimmer of different sort of hope that there might be a recovery to an acceptance of the fact that this is how she was now, and now to her passing. And I watched them grapple with it and come to a place where, quite interestingly, they had so much acceptance that as I look at what I call the show and tell boards, the picture boards that are usually up for viewing during memorial services and things, most of the pictures were from after the onset of her illness, which was not what I was expecting. I didn't really know what to expect, but I've certainly been in similar situations where most of the pictures were from before the onset of the illness, and it's almost as if the person didn't have a life since the onset of their illness, and this was not the case here. And what struck me as I was talking with not one of the family members, but somebody else who'd been involved at this other church, and she was saying, "What are you going to talk about tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, we have a theme, and you know how I feel about that," because we had discussions about it at other times. It struck me that here was this experience that so directly applied to this idea of hope. How do we keep going when it seems like it isn't possible to keep going? And it's really true that the choice is ours. It's really true that we can decide just to pack it up and become bitter, miserable people. I think sometimes the difference really is something about our personality. I think there are some people that just reach a point where they can't go on, where they just can't face it anymore, and it's easier to be bitter and negative than it is to have hope. But I think that's a really small segment of the population, and I think it's usually the result of a lot of things that have happened that haven't been addressed. I don't think you get to no hope overnight. I don't think if today you feel like you can deal with most everything that comes along, tomorrow you feel like you can't deal with anything that comes along, unless something pretty significant intervenes. And then it's only temporary. So what in the world does this have to do with waiting for Jesus, with this whole Advent idea? I think if there's a message of Jesus, and I'm not a big fan of that second Advent, Jesus coming again focus. But if there's a message of Jesus, it's a message of hope. Particularly in a time like ours, a socio-political time like ours, where it seems like every time you turn on the television, there's something in the news that says the world has gone to hell in a handbasket and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Jesus came to the very people who are subject to the kinds of persecution we're seeing contemporarily in the news. It suggests that there's a cycle. It suggests that there's something in human nature, particularly when human nature gets together in groups and becomes compartmentalized, where there will always be a part of us that wants to set aside the different, however you want to define different. because we're extremely good looking. It's a cross to bear. But more often it's because whatever it is about that difference triggers all this fear. Often it's the unknown or the semi-known or the hardly known at all. And we don't know how to integrate that. But the life and ministry of Jesus shows us that that's exactly who he went to. And I believe the surest way to find hope when we are struggling to find hope is to look for examples of hope. How have other people faced this? And the answer we get really in the religious stories of every tradition is that those founding people who didn't know they were founding people had hope. Didn't listen to common wisdom, didn't listen to common knowledge, didn't listen to societal expectations, didn't care what those people thought, didn't care what the 1% thought, didn't care what the elected thought. Most of all, didn't care what their bishop thought, what their pope thought, or anybody else. They went and stepped out, recognizing that hope lies in something other than temporary and passing conditions. And recognizing, too, that they had the ability to make the choice. Whether you're talking about Pearl Harbor Day or any other event in history, the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, the Civil Rights Movement in the teens now, which is a depressing thought. I remember when I was young and I thought the period from 1910 to 1920 was so long ago. And it occurs to me that people will look back at this point and not too long and say, those people are really old. But no matter what you're looking at, people are always faced with a choice, which means it's our decision. You can give up hope, or you can maintain hope. You can choose not to live, or you can live. You can look at the reality of what's in front of you and realize, strangely enough, one of the most frequently repeated statements placed on Jesus' lips in John's Gospel is, be not afraid. Happiness and hope are linked, and they are a choice. And nobody can take that away from us unless we let them.